Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. The most often published images of Richmond, Virginia during the Civil War show scenes of utter destruction of the city's main business district, the result of fires set by Confederates during the evacuation of the city on April 2nd and 3rd, 1865. Images like this one here, the burnt out ruins of the district and damage by shells to public buildings captured the attention of enterprising photographers eager to characterize the demise of the Confederate nation by revealing the destruction of the city. The mass of crumbling, charred walls of roofless warehouses and other structures in a similar condition became an icon representing the loss of Southern arms and victory for the conquering Union troops. Americans saw these images in close to real time as photographers rushed off to mass produce prints from their glass negatives and sell those to a public eager to bear witness to the end of the war. Illustrated newspapers published engravings to show the smoke from fires engulfing the beleaguered city. These images, like this one here, are seared into our memory, our American memory. Forgotten, however, are images of Richmond like this one, an engraving of the city in the 1850s, a time when Richmond streets bustled with activity as the gentle breeze of prosperity wafted through the air. It was a city on the rise, a major hub of activity and enslaved people in a state that had contributed so much to the nation's founding and its early history, including almost half of the first 16 presidents. This was Richmond during the first few months of the war, as military men and white citizens gloried in their freedom and the excitement of a second revolution, a romantic time, a romantic revolution to liberate them from what they believed to be a corrupt government in Washington, usurped by Abraham Lincoln and his Republican Party, causing the long simmering political divide to come to a boiling point as secession ordinances were ratified in state after southern state. One of the residents of Richmond, Sarah Ann Brock, her life dates were 1831 to 1911, and she was known as Sally to friends. She had two brothers who served as surgeons in the Confederate Army. Sally herself nursed sick and wounded men and proved a keen observer during those 4 gradually more difficult years of war. After hostilities ended, she turned to writing to earn a living. Her 1867 book, Richmond During the War, 4 Years of Personal Observation by a Southern Lady, describes life, in her own words, in Richmond during those first few months and throughout. I want to read a passage to you from her recollections of what those early days were like. Sally begins. In a very short time, the population of Richmond increased in a wonderful ratio. Strange faces greeted the citizens at every turn, and the city, even at that period, began to wear the stern and remarkable characteristics she has ever since retained. The absorbing question of the moment was that of war. The most active enthusiasm was everywhere visible. It was well that we were not then aware of our own weakness, nor that we were in want of everything but brave hearts and willing hands. As a people, a living exemplification of the truth of the proverb that where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Sanguine expectations of speedy success were entertained by many, and some doubted whether the policy of coercion would be carried out in an active engagement. It was hard to believe that we were actually plunged into the troubles we so much depreciated, that the horrent front of war was bristling before us. The theater of war on land was soon understood to be on our own soil. Virginia was to be the principal battleground of the antagonistic forces, and General Lee, who had resigned his commission as colonel of cavalry in the old United States Army, was placed in command of all the Confederate forces in Virginia. Feeling that our state had become the particular object of hatred and hostility to the old government, we hastened with all possible energy to meet the necessities which might arise. The most active preparations for the terrible future commenced from the time that Virginia ranged herself under the banner of the Southern Confederacy. Colleges and public schools of all grades suspended operations, and our young men hastily sought instruction in the art of war. Men of all grades and professions were to be found filling up the ranks for the coming contest. The clergyman laid aside his surplice, the lawyer his briefs, the physician his scalpel, the merchant his ledger, the farmer his plow, the artisan the tools which denoted his craft. All placed themselves in the ranks of the military for assignment to whatever position might best be suited to them in the defense of their country. The most lucrative employments were cheerfully abandoned. The widest fields for enterprise were unnoticed and neglected in the spirit of patriotism which incited our population to action. Could all of this have been but from the excitement of the times, the ebullition of passion, a spurious enthusiasm? It may do for one remote from the scene of action to answer yes, but to an eyewitness, another solution to the mystery is evolved. It was the bursting of the green withs with which the young giant was fettered. It was the breaking of the cords of oppression with which he had been bound. It was the undying love of liberty, which had been re echoed from the ancient walls of old St. John's, which gives a name to one of the seven beautiful hills of Richmond, a legacy bequeathed by their forefathers through their spokesman, the immortal Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. They felt to fight, to fight in a just cause and for our country's glory is the best office of the best of men, and to decline when these motives urge is infamy beneath a coward's baseness. But it is useless to attempt an explanation of the motives of Virginians, at least, in the conduct of the late war, nor would we draw invidious comparison with the people of the other states of the South. All were actuated by the same motives, all were imbued by the same spirit, nor do we, by these remarks, wish any apology understood. The justice of their cause was the mainspring of their action. To them, it was clear and undimmed as the cloudless sunlight. To all whose minds are unclouded by prejudice or undarkened by fanaticism, it must appear so. Should these lines meet the eye of any who may be disposed to give a harsh judgment, we only ask that, for a single moment, the promptings of a better principle within may be yielded to, that a position may be taken from a Virginia standpoint, and then make the decision. Under such circumstances, we fear it not. It could only be what the brave and generous must ever award the brave and generous. In the meantime, the uprising throughout the state had been almost universal. Military companies were speedily formed in every section of the country. Indeed, with such alacrity and zeal did the young men press forward to join in the service of the South that the numbers seemed likely to exceed the demand. Every railroad train that arrived in Richmond bore its freight of soldiers. Very soon, from all directions around the city, the white tents of the soldiery were soon seen dotting the landscapes. The first regiments from the states south of Virginia, which were transported thither, were the 1st South Carolina, commanded by Colonel Gregg, and the 2nd South Carolina, commanded by Colonel Kershaw. Their entire passage from Charleston was an ovation. Everywhere on the routes, demonstrations of the most enthusiastic and flattering character greeted them. At every depot and turnout on the railroads, crowds assembled to get a sight of the heroes of Fort Sumter. Their arrival in Richmond was greeted by the most cordial welcome, and they bore the appearance of guests at a holiday festival rather than the stern features of the soldier. The sadder and darker side of the duties of their new profession had not become familiar yet. Their encampments were thronged by visitors who wished to hear from the lips of the young volunteers their wonderful story of the bloodless victory of Fort Sumter. The evening dress parade attracted admiring crowds of ladies to whom every soldier seemed a hero. It was a delight of the young South Carolinian to detail his experience in the campaign and to give expression to the enthusiastic patriotism which swelled his youthful bosom. Hope and fancy blended around him in such a halo of glory that disappointment or failure never found place for a moment in his imagination. So, there you've got an early recollection of Richmond as it was in April and May, perhaps June of 1861 by Sallie Brock, a resident. Sally's recollection of what the city was like in those opening heady days, weeks, and months of the war, the soldiers coming in from South Carolina, reveling in the glory of Fort Sumter. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.